Hey, welcome to Paint Night. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me again. Tonight we're doing sunflowers in a striped vase, which I'm really excited about. I love sunflowers, and these, they always represent happiness, and they always want to, they face the sun. So I'm just adjusting my volume here. They face the sun and they're always looking for sunlight and happiness. So we're going to paint them tonight in a striped vase. I have my reference painting here. If you want to follow along and sort of, mimic what I've done, I'm going to walk you through all of the steps to create the sunflowers, and you can play around. The idea here is to be creative with your background and your brush strokes. You know, I like to paint loose. If you're not joining me live, you are watching this recorded. So I hope that you will kind of do your own thing, which is sort of the idea here. So we're going to start by mixing some colors. In our supplies list, I always just suggest that you at least have the primary colors plus black and white, because that's what we will use to mix all other colors. So tonight we have blue, yellow, and red, which are our primary colors. And then we have black and white, which we're going to use to lighten colors and create darker colors. And we're going to use a little bit of black in our vase tonight. So you should have some paper plates to mix your colors on if you don't have a color palette, a painting palette, and you should have a good variety of brushes. Also have some water to rinse your brushes and some paper towels so you can dab off your brushes in between. So we're going to start with mixing up our yellow for our sunflowers. We're going to need 2 shades of yellow. We're going to need some black and green for the center and a little bit of red. And we need our black and white for our vase. Now you can see in my reference photo that I kind of did a blue background or a blue outline on the vase and then kind of went over it with black and white stripes. So we can do that tonight, which is kind of fun. It kind of gives it a Mediterranean feel. And then I like to kind of go back and forth. While we're waiting for the paint to dry on our first layer of petals, we will go and work on our background or our vase, and we'll just kind of keep rotating around, giving our paint a chance to dry. So let's start by just kind of outlining what we're doing. Now I'm using canvas paper. It's actually a 9x12 sheet of canvas paper that is treated. And I have measured it off to fit an 8x10 frame. So that's what I'm using tonight. You can use any size canvas that you like or paper. I'm using one on a little mini easel, a tabletop easel, so you can see what I'm doing. But if you want to work flat, that's okay too. And then I like to kind of step back here and there and look at it from a different angle while I go along. So that's always helpful too. So let's just start by outlining what we're doing. And I'm actually just going to use plain blue, not going to mix it at all. I'm just going to add a little bit of plain blue onto my palette. And then I'm going to take kind of a somewhat pointy, smaller brush, thin, and I'm going to just draw what I'm going to do. So I'll start with the vase. I like to go off center, but that's just me. If you prefer to have your vase right in the center, then you go right ahead and do that. But, and we're kind of doing like a jug feel. So it has a little spout on it. And if you wanted to just go with a plain straight square or rectangular vase too, that would work as well. So totally up to you. Okay. We're not going to draw the stems in just yet, but I will kind of measure out or kind of draft out 4 sunflowers. So we're going to have one here facing this way. we'll have one kind of looking up top. Remember, these sunflowers are always facing their face towards the light. So they're coming in from all different angles. We'll pick tall one over here. Okay, so that just kind of gives us an idea of where we're going with this. I think it's a good idea to start with, let's start by mixing our yellow and get at least a first layer of petals down, and then we'll go back and we'll work on our background and our vase. So while I have this blue on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and mix a tiny bit of, I'm going to turn this into green, and then I'm going to add black because we're going to do the centers of our flowers first. So what we're going to do is take a little bit of the blue and move it over onto a different area of the palette. And then add in a little bit of your yellow, your primary yellow. And that's going to make a green. Okay. So you can see that made a nice green. That green we're going to use throughout our painting. We can use it for the stems, and we're going to use it in the center of our sunflowers, but mixed with a little bit of black. So let's get a little bit of black on there as well. No need to rinse the brush just yet. Okay, so I've got a little bit of black. I'm going to take some of it over and move it towards my green, and I'm going to mix in a little bit of the green I made. So I've got kind of a greeny black. It's not a straight black, and it just kind of softens it a little bit. I don't want black in the middle of my sunflowers. So I'm going to use that kind of greeny black to create the centers of my sunflowers. And I like to paint loosely, so I'm not going to be too detailed about, you know, having perfect circles or perfect petals. I'm just going to kind of create somewhat of a circle to identify that that is the center of the flower. Okay. Okay, so there's our centers. I'm going to rinse my brush off, and I'm just going to leave it in the water. I'm going to take a new brush. If you don't have another brush that's sort of a similar shape, then rinse it off and use it. But if you have a brush that has more of this type of shape, this would be ideal for our petals, okay? So it's kind of flat, it's a little bit square, but it's kind of tapered on the top. This is going to be a great brush for our petals. So let's mix our yellow. Take a little bit of yellow on your plate or on your palette. And take a little bit of red on your palette somewhere else. And we're going to create a slightly darker yellow. So I'm going to, it's almost an orange. I'm going to mix in just a tiny drop of that red into my yellow. And you can see that just kind of gives it a little bit of depth. It's not an orange. And if you feel like it is too orange, you can add a little bit of white. Remember, we're creating a few different shades of yellow here. So we're going to start with the darker, and then we are going to create two more shades lighter to create some highlight in our sunflower. So I like the orange I made, but I feel like I need a little bit of white. I feel like I need to lighten it up a little bit. So I am going to go ahead and just add a little bit of white into there. There we go. That's beautiful. That's like a nice sunshine color. That's what it needed. Okay. That's perfect. It's not bright yellow. It's not orange. It's just a beautiful sunny yellow, kind of like an egg yolk color. Okay, just kind of dab off your brush if it's too thick with paint. And what we're going to do is we're going to start from the center of the flower. Now I'm not going to quite touch the black because it is still wet. I'm just going to come a little bit away from the black and I'm going to work my way from the inside out. And as I come out towards the outer edge of the petal, I'm applying less pressure on my brush, okay? Also, keep in mind too, the petals are opening up towards the sun, right? So let's start with the flower on the bottom left. We're going to create the petals on the outer edges. So I'm just coming away from the black a little bit, applying a little bit extra pressure, and then applying less pressure as I come out towards the edge. Let me take a little bit more on there. I'm leaving a little space in between, and I'm coming out again. Now all of these petals are going out towards the left. Until I get to the center, and they're going to start wrapping around a little bit. So I'll show you what I mean. I want all of my petals to continue facing left. So even these ones up here are going to kind of come around and wrap themselves around the black center. And when you get to the far right edge, we're going to create kind of a sideways petal here. So I'm just going to touch my canvas and kind of do a sideways petal. And you can kind of twist your brush as you go a little bit. Okay, awesome. So there's our first one. So let's move on to our bottom right. So same thing. Starting a little bit of ways from the black center, everything is going to face the right this time. So we'll start on the far right, applying some pressure and then a little bit less as we work our way out, leaving a little bit of space in between the petals. And as you come a little bit higher up, you're going to make sure those petals are wrapping around the center. And as you get towards the opposite side of the black face, you can do that sideways petal again. So we're just kind of doing a sideways one to kind of create the illusion that the petals are wrapping around the face of the sunflower. All right, so top left. These guys are all going up. And these petals are going to end up touching some of my other flower when we get to that point, which is totally fine. So I'm going to wrap around a little bit. And then as we come towards the bottom, we're going to do that sideways petal. Okay, on to the last. Starting to overlap my petals a little bit. And one last sideways guy. There we go. Okay. So that's the first layer of our petals. If you have painted with me before, you know I like to do plenty of layers to really give the painting some life and some texture. So don't be afraid to use thick paint in some areas. We're going to be creating lots of highlight and some depth. So we'll get there eventually, but this is a really good start. So let's move on to our vase, and then we can decide what color background we're going to do. So I'm going to, you can either leave your brush aside or put it in some water. We're going to be mixing another color of yellow. So you've already got the yellow on your brush. If you have more than one brush, then keep this one for our next color of yellow. Otherwise, you can put it in the water and rinse it off. So let's go on to our vase. We're going to need a slightly smaller brush or something kind of flat like this, similar to the one we were just using for our petals. If you happen to have another one, then that's great. I like the idea of having kind of a blue outline around the vase. Like I said, I think it feels kind of Mediterranean. I'm actually going to add a little bit more blue and just kind of, you know, create a bit of an edge or an outline around that. Totally up to you. We can just go with black and white if that's what you like. Okay. All right, I am just going to rinse that off and then go in with some black stripes to start. Now I already have some black on my palette from before. So I'm just going to go ahead and dip my brush right into the black. I'm not mixing it. It's just plain black. And now you can see in my reference photo that the stripes are slightly curved, and that gives the illusion of a rounded vase. So I'm going to do that same thing. And you can come right up to the edge of the vase. Don't worry about being perfect with it. So it's kind of like a mini happy face. That's sort of the shape that you're creating. To give that rounded illusion. Okay, perfect. So we'll come back to that and do the white, and then we will kind of get some shading happening around the stems. See back here, I've got the opening of the vase just kind of peeking out there from behind the petals. So you can add that in now, or you can wait. Okay, so let's move on to our background. We're not going to need that black brush for quite some time, so I would put it in the water and give it a good rinse. So when we're working with yellow, a way to make that stand out is to create a background that is the opposite of yellow. The opposite of yellow on the color wheel is purple, a sort of a shade of purple. So in my reference painting that I did earlier, don't mind the dog, you can see I have just hints of purple coming out from behind the yellow, but the rest of my background is white, or kind of like a plaster color. I kind of wanted to create the illusion that this vase was just sitting up against a wall. So let's go ahead and mix something. We could potentially just stick with white and maybe kind of go in around the flowers with a purpley or a pink or a rose to really make that yellow pop. Or we can do an entire light blue background, which would also be really cool against the vase. So this is kind of where you get to be creative. I think that I like the idea of creating a little bit of a purpley blue behind the yellow flowers, and then maybe it fades into a white. So that's where I'm going to go. I've already got some blue on my plate. So I'm going to just mix in a little bit of white. Okay, so I've got a pretty big brush here now because we've got a lot of space to work with. So if you have a bigger brush, this is a good time to use it. I'm going to take some white right into my blue to create a really, really light blue. Which is going to be really beautiful behind these yellow flowers. You could potentially make a light pink. And so if you wanted to make a pink, you would just mix a little bit of red into some white and you'd end up with a really pretty shade of pink. I think I'm just going to go with some blue for now behind the behind my petals. Now you don't have to be too careful about, you know, filling in all the little white spots. A lot of this white space is going to end up getting filled with more yellow from your petals. But this is a good time to just kind of go into the big spaces and fill in some of the gaps. And you can already see how that yellow is popping with the blue behind it. Okay. Now I think what I'm going to do is just end up getting a little bit lighter towards the bottom. So I'm going to add a little more white onto my blue that I made, and I'm not going to mix it. I'm just going to go in with straight white and kind of blend those two together. And remember, this is loose, right? So don't be too worried about the transition between the colors. Let's just get it on there for now, and then we can kind of work with it as we go. I also like to use brush strokes in different directions to give some texture. Cool. All right. So we can let that brush soak because I think we're done with this part. Let's start mixing our second shade of yellow. So if you are watching the recording of this, this would be a good time to pause it. This would be the time that you could take out your hair dryer and speed this along by blow drying it so the paint dries a little faster. Or you can step back. So if you're working on a flat surface, this is a good time to maybe prop up your painting against a wall or against something and look at it from a different angle and kind of give yourself an idea of where you're going next. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to my yellow brush and I'm going to start making a new shade of yellow. So I still have quite a bit of white on my palette. I'm just going to mix that into the yellow that I previously had there, which I ran out of. So that was good. I mixed the exact amount that I needed. So that's quite a bit lighter. That might be a bit too light for my next shade of yellow. I think I'm going to add a little bit more yellow into that. I still have a little bit of that red on my palette, which I think would be really pretty to just add in tiny, like barely touching it with my brush, but it's just going to give it that warmth that I'm looking for. And if you're finding that it's just too close to your original yellow, you're going to need to add a little bit of white. That's what I am seeing. I'm seeing that mine is just a little too close. There's not much of a difference there. So I'm adding in some white. Okay. So exactly the same thing that we did the first time with our petals, we're going to do again. Get most of your paint off of that brush. Okay, we're starting from the center, not quite touching the black. And we are applying a little more pressure towards the center and then lifting the brush slightly as we work our way out. And this next layer of petals does not have to be directly on top of the original. This is where you can start filling in some of that white space. And it doesn't matter where you start. Start making your way around each flower. Maybe some of your petals have a more pointy edge. There we go. You can see that that top flower that I just did with the lighter yellow is starting to come to life. Okay, it's working. I had a little bit of blue on there, so now I've got green. I had some wet blue paint and now I have one green petal, but that's okay. We can go over it later. No bigs. Okay. All right. That's looking great. So what we can do now, while we're giving that a chance to dry, is go over our white on our vase. Now we're just going to use plain white. We're going to go right in between those black lines. You're going to want to use that flat square brush if you have one that we used for the black. Just give it a good rinse. We're just going to go in with straight white. Okay. But, you know, feel free if you wanted to create different colors. This is a good time to play around with that. Whoop. Okay, using the opposite end of the brush here. Okay, so we're going to go in right in between those black stripes. Don't be afraid to get some thick paint in certain areas. I love thick paint. Creates a beautiful texture. Also, don't be afraid to not have perfect lines. I actually purposely try not to. So Just let the brush do its thing. I think it gives it so much more character when you aren't too particular about the fine details and the perfection of it. Okay. All right. So while we're waiting for our petals to dry, what we can do is work on our stems. So we had that original green that we used to mix in with the black for the center of our flowers. Let's go back to that. If you still have some left on your palette, that's perfect. A light green like this is gorgeous, but you could add in a little more black, maybe in some areas, not all of them, to make it a little bit deeper. And kind of imagine where a stem might be coming down, right? So I've got one kind of happening up here. I've definitely got one happening in the vase. And maybe there's a little piece of stem happening up there. You can also take, if you're using a square brush, use the side of it, the thinner side of it, and get a few kind of longer leaves starting to stick out. And they can come right on top of some of the petals. Maybe there's a couple leaves sticking out right into the vase. There we go. Right, we're just giving the idea that there's a little greenery poking in and out. Doesn't have to be perfect. Like that there. There we go. Like that. Okay. I feel like I want to add just a little bit of black on my stem, a little bit just here and there to give it some depth. I feel like that green is a little bit bright for me, but totally up to you. Okay. All right. So while we're waiting for that to dry, we can go ahead and work on the background. If you feel like you want to lighten things up or you feel like you need a second layer there, this is the time to do it. So I'm going to go back to my big thick brush. And I still have some of that light blue on my palette. I am going to add a little bit more of it. So I had that beautiful light blue. I've got a little bit of white sitting there still. If you don't, you can add some. You can add a little bit more of a soft pink if that's what you were working with. And this is the time to kind of add that detail. Like I said, I like to kind of work my brush in different directions to give some texture. You can come right up to the vase, the white space if you need to, and kind of fill that in. There. So I've got the darker blue still happening at the top. Okay. All right, so while that's drying, this is kind of a good time to get any detail happening around your vase. I'm going to go back to my original dark blue. I feel like I lost some of it here, so I'm just going to add a little bit more of that in here, creating that blue outline. I lost my spout. I'm just going to add that back in. It was covered by my petals. There we go. Yeah. We are going to take a little bit of our final yellow, our real light yellow, and give our vase a little bit of a highlight. So it's almost like the reflection of the yellow sunflowers is coming right down onto a nice shiny vase and giving that hint of yellow. So we'll do that last. But for now, I think we can probably move on and get our red happening in the center of our sunflowers. So what you're going to need is your smallest brush. So that's going to look like either your tiny square brush, thin, or you can go real tiny like this if you have something like that. What we're going to do is we're going to come around the center, the outside of our black faces, and we're just going to give some tiny, tiny little red lines. And that's going to fill in some of that white space that we left there between the black and the yellow. So that's what we're going to do with that. So if you still have a little bit of the plain red on your palette, mix a little bit of the yellow you made into it, if you still have some yellow. If not, add a little bit more to your palette. Because we're just going to soften that red. We're not quite making an orange, but we're just softening the red a little bit. Okay, so I'm using my tiny brush, and what I'm going to be doing is just kind of creating little lines like this around the black. So we're going to go right into the yellow. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. Don't worry about perfect lines. Don't worry if there's a little piece missing. There. You can see that gave it some beautiful depth and some warmth around there. You also don't have to go all the way around the black face. You can just see, so my top flower, for example, I've got some petals covering the bottom of that black center. So there's no point in doing any red around there. Okay. It's great. Okay. And you know, there are different colors of sunflowers too. So if you're going to do this again, I have a lot of paint club members who decide to paint the same painting again a second or third time, and you'll notice that it always comes out differently because you're never going to mix the colors exactly the same as you did the time before. And also there's just so many fun variations you can do in different shades, and you know, it depends on your mood and what you're feeling. So feel free to just, you know, make pink sunflowers or blue sunflowers with a yellow background. That would be kind of cool to like reverse it. Okay. So that's coming alive. I think that that's looking really great. What we're going to do for our last layer of yellow is go with the lightest yellow that we can possibly make. So not quite white, but like just a nice soft baby yellow. And we're not even going to go around the entire flower with it. We're just going to step back at this point and have a look at your painting and decide what could pop, like where could you add a highlight that maybe the sunlight is coming in through the window and it's just creating like a beautiful light highlight on just a couple of the petals, right? And then we're going to take that same yellow and we're going to come down into our vase with it. We're also going to add that yellow to the center of our sunflowers on the black face to create some little seedlings that might be showing. So again, if you have a hair dryer, this is a good time to pull that out and give your painting a little quick dry to help things along. And if you don't, that's okay. We're going to mix our lightest yellow next. So just take a minute to just kind of step back and have a look. Like, so if your painting is flat, prop it up. If your painting is upright, lay it flat, look at it from different angles. Sometimes I even like to flip the painting around, like, you know, sideways or upside down and look at it from a totally different angle. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to my yellow brush. And I'm going to create my lightest yellow. So I still have some yellow on my palette. There's not much there anymore, but I'm going to add some white into it. And if you don't have any yellow left, you're going to have to make some. So just take your nice bright yellow, your primary yellow. I'm just adding a drop of it, mixing it in with my white. And I'm not going to add any orange in this time because I want it to be brighter. So you can see I've got a nice bright yellow now compared to some of the other yellows that I have already made. And I'm not going to apply much pressure at all. I'm going to keep it nice and light. But this is where I'm going to probably come down and maybe come right onto my vase. Right? And it's just here and there. I'm not even doing the whole flower. But you can see where I have highlighted compared to the other flowers, how much more that pops. So as much as I'm not about fine detail, I think it's important to step back and be focused and deliberate about where some of these highlights are going to go. And I'm really not applying a lot of pressure at all. I'm actually holding the brush a little bit higher up and more loosely so I can just kind of let the brush flow. This is where I like to add some of that thicker paint to really get some texture happening, because when it dries, you'll see that thickness. Yes, that's coming along. Okay. If you see any white space, this is a good time to fill it in. And don't be afraid to go in different directions, you know, have some of your petals overlap onto other flowers. Awesome. So while you have that yellow on your brush, this is a good time to add some of the highlight to your vase. The black should be dry by now. So we're going to just kind of tap or dab the brush onto the vase so it doesn't smear in case the black is wet. And I'm going to do 2 different highlights because we have a rounded vase, right? So I'm going to do one kind of over towards the right and one over towards the left. So you can see in my reference painting what I mean there. We've got some yellow highlight running all the way down, and I'm just kind of dabbing it in a straight line down the center of the vase. Again, not perfectly, but just to kind of give the idea that the light is hitting it. Love that. If you want, you can imagine that a petal has fallen loose and it's maybe falling, you know, midway or halfway down your painting, or maybe it's resting along the bottom. And then you can go back to your real tiny brush, the one that you used to make your little red flecks in the face of the flower. Rinse it off if it still has red on it. And let's take some of that yellow and add some little dots or seedlings to the center of your faces. And they can just be random dots. Oh, it's a little too thick. Okay. If you need a little bit more detail of highlight in your vase, you can add that in with your little tiny brush. You can also take that yellow, that light yellow, and add a little highlight onto the handle of your vase. And wherever else you feel like it needs a little pick-me-up. Okay. Now, if you have any white space that you are not happy with and you want to fill in, like for example, I have, I'll just try to move this a little bit closer. You can see I have some white space still showing around some of my petals, but I like that. What you could do is take some of the blue with a small brush and fill that in if you like, or you can leave it. Or you can create a completely different shade and almost outline some of your petals. So I like that effect. I think it really makes the yellow pop even more. I'll just show you one and you can decide if it's something you want to do. So I would take the blue that I've already made and I'm going to add in a little bit of the red because blue and red make purple. And so I'm almost creating like a mauve, like a lavender. And this is just kind of a style that I like. I like it sort of, it feels abstract, it feels different. It feels like something you wouldn't necessarily see in nature, you know? So it kind of draws your eye to it. So I've got a little bit of that lavender on my brush. I'm just going to kind of go, I'm going to go in and, you know, just almost outline some of those petals that are missing a little bit of blue around them. And that purple against the yellow is really going to help it pop. Okay, so if I show you up close, you can see that it's almost just created like a shadow around the petals. And I've done it up here as well, just sort of in some little white spaces, but it's just enough to kind of create a beautiful contrast between the yellow and the background. So it's just one more layer. And this is where you just add in your final details, you know, step back, have a look, what's missing, what needs a highlight. Okay. I always suggest too that you don't have to end here. You could, if you feel like you aren't quite done, because you'll know when your painting is done, it's okay to step away and sleep on it. And not literally, but give it a night, you know, and then come back to it tomorrow morning or in a couple of days once you've had a chance to really look at it and decide, you know, oh, I need a little more depth here. I need a little more highlight here. I could potentially make that outer shadow maybe a brighter purple or a more of a pink to really make those yellow petals pop. So this is a good time to kind of decide, like, do I need to step back? Am I done? Because it is possible to overwork a painting and overdo it, and then you can't go back. So I always suggest, you know, if you're not quite sure, walk away and sleep on it for the night. So that kind of wraps up this painting. We made a gorgeous vase of sunflowers in a short amount of time. And I'd love to see what you come up with, what you created, whether it's, you know, a completely different color scheme or if you stuck to this one. So feel free to email me your creation as always. And I'm on social media as well at Paint with Jen Casey. So please stay in touch and thank you for joining me today. I look forward to painting with you again in the fall. This kind of wraps up our season right now. So come fall, we'll have some more fun live events. And so please do stay in touch and make sure that you come back for those. So happy to be with you today. And one more tip, if you are not done your painting and you feel like you could keep going and you still have paint on your palette, all you need to do is wrap it with some plastic wrap to prevent any air from getting in, and then you'll be able to come back to your same colors tomorrow or the next day. So that's a good way to keep your paint wet so you don't waste your paint. And sometimes it's hard to remember what you use to mix your colors. So I always recommend starting a kind of like a recipe book for your colors that you can keep, and then you just write down your recipe, you know, like it's 3/4 white with a touch of blue and, you know, a bit of yellow or something along that line. And then you have a swatch of it. And so you have a kind of an idea of how you got to that color. So that's how that works. So thanks again. And I really look forward to seeing your creations as always. So have yourself a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.